Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Jess Druey, who is the founder, the originator of Whiny Berry. Whiny Baby. I was thinking of grape berries this morning, because it's a beautiful day in the
Honestly,
National
I
Wine.
think you just gave me something I may need to steal down the line.
All
Whiny
right.
baby blossoms into whiny baby.
So let's start there, Jess. I mean, you're a pretty young person to start a wine brand. We'll get to that in a minute, but why the name Whiny Baby? Are you a whiny baby?
I am the most self-proclaimed whiny baby. I did it strategically because in corporate America, Gen Z, which I technically fall under, I'm a little bit of a cusper, but I'm 27, born in 97, so I'm Gen Z technically. And in corporate America, we get a bad rep for being whiny babies, which we are. We wear our emotions on our sleeves. But it also represents what I'm all about, what the brand is all about, which is embracing those who are new on their wine drinking journeys, babies on their wine drinking journey, if you will. And we said this while we were not recording, so I just wanted to make sure to say again, a little bit of a fangirl moment for me meeting you, Karen. Like you said, I'm a little bit younger and new on my wine journey. And when I started all this madness, I was 22, and your book, your speaking was one of my first stops as I started to dive into the industry. So thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Very sweet. Well, as I'm tasting the wines, of course, I've got all three wines right here. You make also a rosé, here it is,
Yes.
and a red. And I'm holding these bottles up in part because I also want people to see that, like, look
The
very
little
cute.
bottle charms.
Little bottle charms could double as a bracelet if you need it. But also, this is a still wine, and you put it in a sparkling bottle that also has peel off stickers. So tell me why that is.
Lots of fun innovation. So, I was 22, living in Los Angeles and working for Red Bull. I believe that Red Bull's, I mean, really the greatest beverage marketer of our time. And so I always say that if the wine industry could take just a little bit of that Red Bull lifestyle mindset, we'd be in a little bit of a better position. But yeah, to your point, I think the beauty and the magic of Whiny Baby is that it is made by someone who is new on their wine journey for people who are new on their wine journey. And I've been really fortunate along the way. I think the wine industry gets a bad reputation for being, stuffy or maybe not welcoming. I've actually found, thankfully, the opposite. Everyone's been really wonderful. And I think that the industry reached a point of going, you know what, we do need to be a little bit more open-minded. So people have welcomed me with open arms, and my partners, which I'm sure we'll get into, the McBride sisters, as we were developing our second round of production. The first one I did completely on my own. I essentially bought bulk wine and kind of added these fun details and figured all that out. But when I did the second round of production with the sisters, and I said, hey, my consumers don't know the difference between a still bottle and a sparkling bottle. They care more about the aesthetic, the consistency. And what we wanted to drive home with Whiny Baby was these are your three, it's your starter pack. It's your go-to red, your go-to white, your go-to rosé to dip your toes into the water and in the world of wine. And so, our operations team definitely, our procurement team was raised some eyebrows and going, you want to put what in these bottles? But I have to give credit to amazing partners who just trusted me, trusted the community feedback we were receiving. And sure enough, no consumer has ever asked me about those bottles.
It's fantastic. And I love these little, these are the caps,
Yep.
crown caps, just like you might have on Coca-Cola, with a little conversation starter here. What is your weirdest job? What was your weirdest job interview?
Okay, I love that I've not gotten that one yet. There are a
Oh,
couple
they're all different.
hundred. They're all different. And so sometimes it's funny, I'll go in waves where I'll get a couple like repeatedly, but that one I have not gotten. So I love
It's
that.
like fortune cookie meets wine,
A hundred
right?
percent.
You're going to now talk about this for however long. I was sitting with a friend drinking this wine, and we talked about job interviews.
And
Wow.
you nailed it. And that to me also, obviously, Whiny Baby in and of itself through the branding skews to a younger demographic. But what I found is the detail of the conversation caps, like you said, and the peel and stick savable back label, that crosses generations. Like my 90-year-old grandpa brings Whiny Baby so proudly when he meets up with his friends and he says they got story of your first kiss and there they were remembering back to being 14, 15, and that of course I know that's what we all believe, that that's the magic of wine, that at the end of the day it does what it does best, which is bring people together and create memories.
Well, we met in part because this is Share and Pair Sundays season. We're talking to all kinds of people about wine's historic social role as the beverage that brings people together. And so it was so nice to hear you just automatically, that's what wine is for you. And that's what you've, as we all do, you over time you realize, this is sort of a friend maker
Yes.
wine, right?
And, Gen Z is the loneliest generation. I mean, we're going through a mental health crisis, and I've been doing a lot of research on obviously social media. I'm like of the social media generation. And while it has so many perks, it also has created, a lot of loneliness, a lot of seclusion. And something I've been really thinking about a lot because I have a lot of these conversations and I feel like people who have been in the industry for a long time are curious about my opinion on, is Gen Z really uninterested in wine? And it's never sat right with me. These like doom and gloom headlines. I don't think wine is the problem. I think socialization's the problem. And so I am all about, if we just socialized more, if we, created more opportunities. I don't think that wine is necessarily the product when you're 22 years old that you're going into a grocery store by yourself and pay, but my first time being exposed to wine was joining a book club, watching the Bachelor finale with my girlfriends. And, so that's where people are exposed and fall in love with wine.
Well, let me ask you about that because, um, people always say that wine is intimidating, that when they started out, it was especially intimidating. Why do you think that is? Because, like, for example, I use my computer every day. You use yours. I have no idea. It could be little green men in there that are doing things, right? I
Right.
drive a car every day. If the car breaks down, I'm in total panic because I have no idea how a car works. But those things, not knowing about them, doesn't stop me from using them
Yeah.
every single day.
Yeah.
So why do you think people are intimidated enough about wine to, sometimes just like fall into the loving arms of a margarita?
Yeah. Wow. I love how you said that. And it's an interesting point. I think it's layered. So, first of all, I love the examples you gave, right? Like my grandparents, somehow managed to figure out a computer. And I think some of that is necessity. One thing I'm really passionate about with wine is I didn't grow up in a family that drinks. And so, I should say, not on a regular occasion, right? And so on the flip side, my friends who grew up with parents where it was a ritual, it was a tradition that you have a bottle of wine with dinner, they're naturally exposed to a language that I just never was. So I'd say first and foremost, it's a cultural difference, right? If you grew up in a family like that, I don't want to use the word necessity, but in the same way you drive a car or use a
Mhm.
computer, you with dinner bring a bottle of wine, have a bottle of wine. It's an accessory that's a given, where if you didn't grow up like that, And then secondly, I would say, going off of your metaphor that I love so much with a computer, with a car, right? If you don't know anything, you can find the on button, the start button. You can turn the car on, right? And I think that so when I started Whiny Baby, I was direct to consumer only. And then in this past year or year and a half, entered, mass retail, Target, Total Wine, Bevmo, all those places. And I had to learn about wine merchandising for the first time. And I think we have a long way to go in terms of wine merchandising, because I think it's when you walk into a store. So, for example, I created these three blends, and we did blends on purpose to remove the complication of varietals. Because I think varietals are first and foremost the compute, right? You're like, where do I even start? So that's why I want to go just start here, with a red blend, a white blend, a rosé blend, and then get curious and go, oh, you know what? I really liked that red blend. And then we could say, hey, it's predominantly Zinfandel. So you really like these cherry berry flavors, and then you start exploring, but there's no like starting place, right? And what's fascinating is on my website, my number one seller is all three together, the starter pack. It's not one varietal. So I
Right.
assume when we entered stores, they put us all together. They put us broken up by
Yeah.
varietal. And so I'm really passionate in these coming years. People always ask, what's next for Whiny Baby? And unfortunately, for the consumer side, not all of it is as, exciting as going to Coachella and becoming, we are doing those things. But for me, I'm like nerd out over, I want to partner with amazing, retailers who want to get to the bottom of how can we better merchandise and educate consumers on the store level, because that's where they're buying wine, is at stores.
And how do you think you would do that? Because um, by definition, I mean, unless you're a digital retailer like wine.com, let's say, you are going to walk into a store and there are going to be, I don't know, 500 to 5,000 bottles in front of you. For me, I guess I think, well, there was a moment when you were 5 years old and you looked up at the ice cream board in Baskin Robbins or something, and you thought, "Ooh, I don't know any of these except for chocolate." But
Yes.
one by one, you tried them.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know how would you organize a store differently so that it was more welcoming?
I would say, and it's interesting because we have all these hurdles. I really believe we are in the toughest industry, and that's why we're facing the problems that we are, right? A great example is actually, this just happened. Super proud to share that the first retailer is now having the bottle beads on a store shelf. That was just kind of a fun detail that I did in the beginning. People love it, but it was only available DTC. And
Right.
Meyer partnered with us and said, we love Whiny Baby, but we want to offer the beads. And so we had to work with our distributor partners to get the beads on, put
Art.
stickers on them. Oh my gosh, is it hard? I mean, those are kind of the challenges. And so the concept of reformatting a store and merchandising, I mean, that has more to do with the retailer and how
Mhm.
open they are. But things that excite me are, basing the wines around the occasions and maybe placing them around when you go into a store and you're having a girls' night, you're going to grab charcuterie, you're going to grab wine. So maybe we put those together along with the recommendations, or even go as far to as, I know I know it's not customary, but like, maybe if you're walking into like the barbecue outdoor section, there's some, so I think down to food, down to occasion, there's different ways that we can translate to the consumer. This, I like to view wine as really the perfect accessory for moments. That's what they really, in my opinion, that's what it is, right? If I'm on a first date, I'm going, how can I accessorize this moment? If I'm hanging out with my girls, watching White Lotus finale, I'm accessorizing that moment. And so I think if we thought of wine more that way, we could reimagine how we're presenting it at a store level.
I was looking up the other day. It also struck me that there are so many occasions in life to where wine is the perfect thing to drink, including watching White Lotus, right? It doesn't have to be an occasion. It just has to be a moment.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about all the cultural moments where wine traditionally is celebrated. So, but those are very narrow, they're Christmas, they're Thanksgiving, they're pretty narrow moments. There are hundreds of cultural moments, Hispanic, Black, Asian, all kinds of moments, including I. I discovered there is a National Day calendar. There are 1,500 national days in the United States, including things like, Lamb Chops Day.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's a wine moment waiting to happen. If you're having it's Lamb Chops Day, let's have some, I don't know, a red blend or Rioja, which is another
Yes.
blend, or you're right that we don't often see the simplest moments right in front of us. And
Absolutely. And I wish that Gen Z could view, I think that the more you get into wine, you view wine like this. It's the best excuse and invitation as well, right? You meet a neighbor, you bring them a bottle of wine, and then maybe you run into that neighbor again and say, "Hey, have you opened that up? Why don't we open it up together?" So I think it's so funny. Wine is just this interesting tool in social interaction. And the more I think the industry dives into that, the more it'll translate to the consumer as well.
yeah, totally. Do you have a favorite food and wine pairing, by the way? I'm
Gosh,
curious.
it's funny. I am so not the person to ask for pairings because we do like hot girl dinner pairings, which is like a silly Gen Z term of like, we eat like Thai takeout and charcuterie. But I would say I think people are always like afraid of spicy food and wine. I love Riesling, and like Riesling and Thai food just for me like nails it. And then super excited, we have been developing an orange wine. Orange is so funny, and I'm very passionate as well about I know this is like a taboo word, but it shouldn't be. The quote unquote natural wine scene or the emerging wine trends that we see with smaller producers. I'm really passionate about bridging those two worlds.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm really interested in kind of what people are drinking at their local wine bars in New York and LA and how we can make that more, reflected at mass.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Tell me a little bit about the moment you fell in love with wine. How did what, or was there a moment, or was it just kind of like, ooh, you slipped right in?
Yeah. So it's a little morbid, but I'll make it quick because it has a happy ending, which is Whiny Baby. But I had the idea for Whiny Baby in a Whole Foods, 2020 peak pandemic. Um, I was going on a first date with a guy. He said, "Come over, I'll cook for you. You bring a bottle of wine." I'm 22 years old, and I'm like, "Okay." So I go to the store and I wanted to impress him, and that's the birth of Whiny Baby. I looked at the shelf and I was like, "What do I buy?" There's clearly a need, for wine that speaks to people like me. I left that day, and I think that people forget to share in their entrepreneurial journey. It's not like I have the idea and I started the company, and there's an in between. And so I had about a year where I look into it, and God, there was not a lot of information about how to start a wine brand. And so I'm researching, and but I had the moment where I was like, oh, there's a bigger reason why I'm passionate about this. And I think I have to say, it wouldn't be worth it without a bigger why because it's so gosh darn hard. And my stepdad got ill and sadly passed. But during those 3 months that he was ill in the ICU, I told you I didn't grow up with parents that really drank. And so for 3 months, I had family and friends that were like living with my mom, and we were coming in and out. And she'd come home from the ICU totally defeated. And every night her friends would make dinner, we'd have wine. And I watched as, she'd share
Mm.
her stories, be defeated, but somehow by the end and several bottles later, we were laughing, finding hope, and I have a photo of that moment, and you can see how tired my mom is. You can see the table of family and friends, and it gives me chills. But that was like, I was 22 and pretty sheltered and naive about the reality of how hard life is. And that was what created the bigger why. It was, oh my gosh, my generation needs to buckle up for how hard life is. If I can create a product that I've found is healing in the sense of bringing people together, that's when I knew wine for me was really my bigger passion.
So beautifully said.
Thank
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting always to me psychologically that everyone's moment is always around other people. It's rare that someone is either by themselves or and almost no one. Sometimes people don't even remember the wine, right? But it doesn't have to be Lafitte Rothschild or
Yes.
something. It's a pivotal moment between people with
Yes.
wine as a kind of vehicle.
Yep.
Um,
That's exactly what I was going to say. I can't even remember what we were drinking. It didn't matter necessarily. At the end of the day, people want something that's delicious, and easy to drink. Now, the way your palate changes, that's a whole other story. Because even me now, I'm like, oh, wow, my palate's changing. Um, but people, I think, forget because you get into wine and then you're like, oh, wait, I forgot what I used to like when I was just starting out. But exactly that. And I met really early on with an Italian somm who lives in my hometown here in Bakersfield, which is where I'm based. And I was intimidated and I wanted to, get her advice and mentorship. And she was like, exactly the question you said. We were talking about what made her fall in love with wine. And she goes, it was some $2 chuck and a guy I had a crush on. And we had this amazing magical night I'll never forget. And that to me, I was like, oh my gosh, if a psalm is saying that, oh, maybe it doesn't need to be so fancy and scary.
yeah. I mean, I've told this story a couple of times, but the first wines I started drinking were 89-cent Bulgarian reds. And
God.
the reason it goes back to wine retail because like you, I mean, in those days in New York, retail stores were very intimidating. They were either really scary because guys who you didn't want to be near were in there, or they were very formal. The sales guys wore suits and,
God.
they would ask you, what are you looking for? Can I help you? What are you looking for? And I would think if I knew what I was looking for, everything would be fine.
Yeah.
And by the way, every bottle in here costs like my weekly salary.
Yes.
So I grew to only I was too afraid to go actually fully into the store. And there was always a basket, a kind of bargain basket right by the cash register. So I never went past the cash register.
Right.
So I drank all these 89-cent Bulgarian Reds
And
for
it
2 years.
and it did the job of
Yeah.
getting you into wine. So I'm curious, what shifted into a career in wine? And I guess I'm also curious your perspective on this emerging generation and what you've seen, in the wine industry and the changes and really what needs to change to capture my generation.
Yeah, I'm to be really honest, I think this angst, worry about Gen Z doesn't I don't know. I'm not worried. I feel like
Why?
wine has so much going for it. For it's been a captivating beverage for 8,000 years. And I think you're right that the current adoption of wine is down to a couple of things. One is not having a lot of occasions. We've grown up a whole generation of people who were isolated by virtue of COVID, isolated by virtue of social media, and who have learned to be a little bit more insular than social. So I think there's that, and also, in the old days, you really only had three. It was like beer, not very good beer, wine could be good, and spirits, and a lot of spirits were not craft spirits. But there wasn't, there weren't cannabis drinks, there weren't ready to drink cocktails, there wasn't hard seltzer. Now you have a ton of choices.
Yeah.
But I still believe that if you if as Gen Z often says that they want authentic, real experiences,
Hmm.
and they want to feel something, want to feel like they're doing good, and they want to feel like they are respecting the environment and respecting nature,
Yeah.
then wine is that answer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, vodka, but you are not the answer.
Right, right. No, I couldn't agree.
Wine is the answer
Yeah.
to that aesthetic.
Mm.
So and anyway, I don't like it when we divide people by age groups. I think that's not
Yes.
helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting. I've fallen victim to it too. When I was at Red Bull, I was in office, the pandemic hit, things switched to work from home, and I've worked from home now for however many years. And it sounds so silly, but when you're at your house all day, it's harder to go and meet someone out for a drink
Yeah.
versus when I was at Red Bull and I was interacting with my colleagues of all ages. That's one of my favorite things about working for big corporations is some of my best friends today are, twice my age from working with them. But when you're already up and out and about, we would all the time go, oh, let's grab a drink after work. And so it's just this relearning of
Mhm.
socialization. But I also think it's this opportunity. I don't know if you've noticed this. There's this trend with Gen Z, especially, but I would say, really all age groups who are now more work from home, they're falling in love with home and homemaking more.
Mm.
There's this trend of like hobbies and scrapbooking and needlepoint again. And part of the I'm going to butcher this word, you know what I'm trying to say?
Romanticism.
Thank you. Part of that of the home is light some candles, pour yourself a glass of wine and do your hobby. So I think I'm completely in the same camp of you of maybe I have a sense you're like me, kind of an eternal optimist in some ways, but I don't believe in this kind of doom and gloom. And I'm gonna ask you again, I want to know what triggered you from that bargain basket to a career in wine and kind of expanding from the bargain basket.
I guess for me, I always thought about wine itself as a companion. It was fascinating. I used to even 89-cent Bulgarian red was fascinating. I would sit doing my homework when I was in high school, and my parents didn't drink wine either. So I thought, okay, well, I it seemed like it had a beautiful aesthetic to me, wine. It was different than the beer aesthetic, and it was different than, drinking spirits. And I liked that sense of wine. And over time, I realized that I was also fascinated by wine, that you could take nature into your body like that. That was like, whoo, every day you could, have a glass of wine. And I began to think that I wanted to learn about wine, which was very hard to do when I started out because there were no schools. It was almost impossible to learn
Google.
wine.
Yeah,
There was no Google, right?
easy.
And I, I, it's a sign of how little I knew that I thought, well, if somebody could master this, people have mastered this, I'll just give it a try.
Yeah.
In fact, I had this fun talk a while ago with Jancis Robinson, who is, the
Yes, of
the
course.
most amazing woman of wine in London. And she said, if I knew in the beginning how much there was to know, I would have I would have given up.
A
And I
hundred.
felt like me too. I didn't know there was a whole lot to know. I figured I can figure this out.
Mm.
But then over time, you grow to love not knowingness.
Yeah.
You realize, oh, there's this whole other aspect of wine that I've never even thought about. And so now for me, in fact, I hate it when people say they want to demystify wine. I think, no,
That's
no,
part of the allure. That's
that is
why
part of the allure.
everybody said to me in the beginning, why are you doing glass bottles? Like, shouldn't your brand should be in a can, and I'm like the glass bottles, and it's part of the allure and the sexiness and it feels sophisticated, although my branding may not. There's something about buying this bottle. Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, and bottles imply communalness, right? With a bottle, you need
Yes.
a couple of people, and so Anybody can drink something out of a single serving can, but that's not the togetherness that we are talking about. Whereas a bottle implies, okay, you're going to grab that neighbor or a friend or a colleague or a
Yeah.
family member and open this and share
Yeah.
it.
It's funny. I think that now I definitely don't fall in the camp of, elite wine knowledge but for a generation that is so obsessed with social status and tools to get ahead and betterment, it's funny how they've not adopted the fact that I have some young girlfriends who are in corporate America, and we joke about how we have on occasion taken up golf to go with some of the higher ups, definitely men, to be part of those conversations we knew they were having. And I think that Gen Z and millennials, and when they also realize, oh, wine is kind of a adulting tool that you can have in your pocket of relating to anyone of any gender, any age, any background, it becomes kind of a social tool as well, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, very, very fascinating. Well, Jess, I think the wines are terrific. By the way, I thank you for sending me my T-shirt. This is the hoodie.
Yes.
And I was almost going to wear this hoodie, but it's warm today in the Napa Valley, so I'm going to save this for a cold morning in the Napa Valley. Um, and thank you for your vision, for carrying your passion so beautifully and so forwardly. I'm both impressed, and I wish you all the best success. You go, girl.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, thank you for being, a legendary person in the industry, so welcoming to those who are just getting started in the industry. We need more of it. And I look forward to collaborating and continuing conversations in the future.
Perfect. All right. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers.